Hi and welcome to See Here on Saturday from the Lighthouse in Wolverhampton. In today's programme we feature a disturbing new report from the RNID which claims GPs could be putting deaf and hard of hearing patients at risk because they don't know how to communicate with them.
Can I just put the loop on you? Put that round. Now if I just switch your hearing aid to T.
We look at a new signed video produced to introduce deaf children to the excitement of science.
The reason it drifts up is because the hot air is lighter than the cold air around it.
And we have a profile of Pat Keysell, best known for her work with the British Theatre of the Deaf and an old programme, Vision On.
And that's the theme for today's programme, the seaside.
But before all that, it's over to the Deaf News.
Hello and welcome to this week's Deaf News with me, Clive Mason. A new report by the British Psychological Society claims that UK employers are still failing to comply with the requirements of the Disability Discrimination Act. The Act says that employers must make reasonable adjustments in the workplace in order to accommodate disabled employees. The report suggests that these failings may be due to poor knowledge of the Act and, in part, a negative attitude towards disabled people. A survey of 77 companies around the UK revealed that only 1/3 of personnel directors and managers rated their knowledge of the Act as good, which left 63% who rated their knowledge as fair or poor, and a few had never even heard of the Act. The charity Sense are running what they describe as one of the ultimate challenges in the United Kingdom. It's called the Three Peaks Challenge. It requires climbers to reach the top of the 3 tallest peaks in England, Scotland and Wales. The exhilarating event will take place from the 11th to 13th of May and again from the 18th to 20th of May. Theatre buffs may be interested in a pilot scheme being run by the Royal Shakespeare Company. The company will be hosting the first ever UK open captioned performance for deaf and hard of hearing theatre goers. It's being held at the Barbican Theatre on the 28th of March during a performance of Antony and Cleopatra. The open captioning system was pioneered on Broadway by the Theatre Development Fund. It's a technique similar to subtitling and is often used for translating opera performances. The entire text, dialogue or lyrics from a performance is pre-programmed word for word into the system and then displayed alongside the stage action on a large screen. The Royal Shakespeare Company already present sign performances, but the new system will allow the audience to read the authentic words within the performance rather than just a signed interpretation. That's all from the Deaf News. I'll see you again later in the programme for the news review, but for now, Lara.
Thank you. A recent report by the RNID has shown that many deaf and hard of hearing people find visiting the doctor a very frustrating experience. Leslie McGill reports on the bad experience of one deaf woman and how a Bristol doctor has improved access for her deaf patients.
Hello. When we're ill, we go to the doctors, we talk to him, he gives us medicine, which makes us better. But, according to an RNID report, deaf and hard of hearing people don't go to see the doctor, putting their health at risk because of the communication difficulties.
The overall important result was the fact that more than 1 in 5 deaf and hard of hearing people go to the doctor and leave without really being sure what's wrong with them. And of course that leads to the fact that so much resource is wasted unnecessarily because 1 in 10 of them have to then go back again to try to find out what really is the problem. But I think what's really worrying is that GPs are not aware that the problem exists. They were asked, do you communicate effectively with your patients? And 87% thought they did.
Did you find the report shocking, and if so, why?
I don't find the report shocking because I've lived with this all my life personally. But I think what's unforgivable is that we, as deaf and hard of hearing people, haven't shouted a lot louder about this and done something a long, long time ago.
Cecilia Lindberg is deaf and from Bristol. She's had many bad experiences at the doctor's. Even trying to get to see her GP has proved difficult. I went to meet her to find out more.
When I get the surgery, I go up to the reception and I tell them I'm deaf and ask them to come and fetch me when it's my turn. And then I go and sit down and they never do. And I sit there and I wait and I wait. And every time the doctor comes to the door, I look up to see if he's calling my name. And then I look around the room to see if anybody's reacting. And if they don't, I say to the doctor, my name is Cecilia Lindberg. Did you just call my name?
What would happen next?
Then I go into the surgery and I come in and the doctor is sitting at his desk looking down and he mumbles something and I can't hear what he's saying. And it's just really embarrassing and awkward.
Would you say that Cecilia's case is typical?
I think it's a very widespread problem, and there's a very simple explanation. It's lack of knowledge, lack of education. GPs are only trained for about half a day on deafness, and many of them miss that half day. The irony is that so much can be done with so little effort. Just speaking clearly, repeating, looking, writing things down occasionally. It's often costless.
Will the RNID be monitoring the service, and how?
Well, we will certainly monitor this because we want, in 2 months' time, to go back to all of the 55,000 GPs and practice managers that we are now mailing with information to find out whether they got the information, whether they want more information, and whether they're beginning to actually change their practice. But equally, in a year, we're going to go back and ask exactly the same questions of deaf and hard of hearing people to see whether our actions have made a difference.
Well, those things are not going to happen overnight. It'll take time before we see the results. But I'm here in Bristol, where a doctor who knows about communication difficulties has made some changes. But what has she done? Let's go find out.
Hi, and welcome to see the doctor, please.
What was your name, please?
Valerie Smith.
Thank you. Just take a seat.
Why did you decide to make these improvements to your surgery?
We've bought two Sarabec amplifiers, which we have one in the consulting room and one in the treatment room. And this enables us to converse one-to-one with patients, either using the neck loop, which they can use with their hearing aid if they switch their hearing aid to T, or we can use it with a stethoscope piece so that that fits into their ears if they don't wear a hearing aid. We've also bought a counter mini loop so that my receptionist can converse much more easily with patients in the waiting room without everybody else in the waiting room hearing what's going on. And we've also bought a text phone which enables us to communicate with those patients who have a text phone at their home. Also, all the staff have now been on deaf awareness courses, and this really has been, I think, probably the most important of all, because this teaches them to look at the patient, speak clearly, make sure they're in a good light, and also learn some of the rudiments of lip reading so that they know what the patient is actually looking for. Can I just put the loop on you? Put that round. Now, if I just switch your hearing aid to T. Can you hear me now?
Oh, yeah.
Lovely. Right. What's the problem?
Well, I've just been feeling really run down lately.
Have you had any feedback from your patients about the changes you've made?
With my own experience of deaf awareness, and also I've been to lip reading classes for 2 years, so I know what's required with lip reading, and it does make a huge difference because you can see the patient actually responding to what you are saying, and you know that the information is being received. If you see that blank look on the patient's face, then you know the information's not gone in, and you've got to try again or rephrase or use some other strategy to make sure that the patient has actually understood what I've said. Hello, how are you today?
I'm okay. I'm feeling it funny. I get a bit short of breath though when I'm playing sport. I'm just a bit worried about it.
Right, okay. I'll just check your blood pressure. Let's do the same. Okay, that's fine.
It's all about education, 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 that familiar mantra. We need to get information and support to GPs around the country, and to help us do that, we formed a partnership with the doctor-patient partnership. But let's not forget, if deaf and hard of hearing people don't stand up for themselves, don't tell the doctor when they can't hear, they don't understand, well then perhaps we don't deserve to be helped.
For more information on the RNID's report on GPs in the deaf community, contact See Here, the address at the end of the programme. Now, for some time the government have been concerned about how science is taught in schools. A report from the University of York suggests that many young people found science at school uninteresting and alienating, and many children after the exams dropped the subject at the age of 16. The problem seems to be that there's a lot of emphasis on learning facts and not enough on explaining how science can offer an insight into the way the world works. So, in an effort to help deaf children to learn about science, microbiologist Natalie Caplet, with funding from the Millennium Awards, has produced a video called Signing Science. So, let's take a look.
The reason it drifts up is because the hot air is lighter than the cold air around it. And like I said, when you press the button, it releases the magnets and allows it to drift up into the air. There it goes.
Well, that looks great. With me now is Natalie Caplet. Hello there, thanks for coming in. and also the two stars of the video, Alex and Megan from Elmfield School in Bristol. Hi there, thanks for coming in.
Hello.
What can you tell me about the content of the video and how you decided what to include?
Well, the video was filmed in Techniquest, which is a science centre in Cardiff, and it includes 13 sequences of Megan and Alex and the presenter Paul going around doing lots of things and having fun. I wanted to include a lot of different subjects, and so there's anything from the spreading of bacteria to the reasons for seasons, the advantage of pulleys, the composition of light, for example. And some sequences also show how much fun you can have in a science centre, as well as learn a lot of things.
So what do you want to achieve with this video?
Well, this video is not a lecture. Hopefully the kids can learn a few things, but it's mainly to get the kids excited about science and for them to see that science is involved in a lot of aspects of our lives. And then it will get the ball rolling and they will want to know more, want to do more, hopefully.
So why is it so difficult to get children interested in science?
Well, as you said earlier, sometimes science is presented like just a lot of facts to learn by heart, and that seems boring and quite hard work, really. But that's not what science is about. Science is really about trying to learn things about the world, asking yourself questions and why and how, and trying to find out the answers for yourself. So the children would participate more, it would make things much more interesting, and hopefully as they grow up, they grow less scared of science and still want to learn more.
When you were making the video, was it really hard work? And what did you enjoy and what didn't you like?
I liked all of it. It was really interesting. It's great.
Yeah, I liked it all too.
Of all the gadgets and science in the video, which one was your favourite and why?
Well, I liked the one where you stood near the screen and there was a light exposure that would stay on the screen. It was really good. There would be an outline of me doing a handstand.
Can you explain to me what's actually going on there?
Right, you see this wall here? It's got some special material on it, and it glows.
What I liked best was the light and mirrors. You look in the mirror and there would be two different faces, but it would look like the same face. It looked really funny.
Well, it's a special glass, but actually it's partly like a mirror. But if you shine the lights on both of us, you can actually see a mixture of both of our faces.
So did you learn more about science by going round the exhibition rather than being in the classroom?
I like learning science at school, but sometimes the teacher tries to explain something and it doesn't mean very much. But actually going around and seeing it in action, right there in front of you, it's much easier to understand.
I like learning things at the exhibition. It was much more interesting. When you're in the classroom, it can be really, really boring. It's much more interesting. You're moving around and there's a lot more to see and do.
So when you grow up, would you like to be one of those scientists in a white coat? Would you? No? Why?
I'm interested in science, but I don't want to be a scientist. I like it, but I wouldn't want to work in it. I want to be an artist.
I'm not sure, because I really, really love horses, so I'm not sure.
Well, thank you very much for coming in. Thank you. The video Signing Science is free and will be distributed to all deaf schools. If you'd like a copy, then contact us at See Here. Pat Keysell became a household name for her work on the multi-award-winning Vision On, and as the artistic director of the British Theatre of the Deaf. Now, over 20 years later, Pat is still involved in theatre with a one-woman show, Stories from Around the World, in which she uses mime, signed English and shadow theatre. Here's an extract.
Who is it? Who is it? Who goes there? Ah, I smell a red-headed girl. Who is it? Who?
It is I, Baba Yaga. Vasilisa. My stepsisters have sent me to ask you for fire.
Oh, yes. Yes, I know them. Yes, I will give you fire. You stay and work for me, and I will give you fire. But if you do not work well, I will eat you up.
Vasilisa cooked a huge meal for Baba Yaga, who ate as much as 10 men. There was nothing left for Vasilisa except a little soup and a crust of bread. Before she went to sleep, Baba Yaga said,
Tomorrow, when I go, you will sweep the house and do the washing, and you'll cook the dinner and go and fetch the water from the pump, and you clean the house and every little speck of dust. You do that, or I will eat you up.
Pat Keysell began her career as an actress and drama teacher, but by the beginning of the 1960s she was working for the assistant head of children's television at the BBC. One of the programmes she was involved with was For Deaf Children. Although the programme was broadcast only once a month, the production team often found it difficult to fill the slot, and there were frequent discussions about where they could find new material.
I said one day, why don't we do some mime? And the producer, Ursula Eason, said that she tried mime and it never worked. She couldn't find the sort of mime that she wanted. So then somebody else from the RNID had a bright idea, why don't we form a mime group with deaf actors? And Pat can train them to do the sort of mime that we want for the programme. So that's how it all started. I hadn't come into contact with deaf people before I went to the BBC. Nobody in our family had been deaf, so it was completely new to me. And at first I thought, I must make sure everybody understands me. And I wrote everything down, copious notes about what we were going to do in the workshops and rehearsals and so on. But very quickly I found it just wasn't necessary, because I'd been trained as a mime artist, and with the mime, and there were some brilliant lip readers in that group, and we just, got along fine. There was no problem at all.
In 1964, the programme For Deaf Children changed its format, and it became Vision On, and Pat was asked to present it.
There was a goose who found a mirror, and she wasn't happy. She looked at herself in the mirror and thought, oh dear, I am ugly. So she decided to change. I wish I was beautiful like you, she said to the swan. There were so many different components to it. There were cartoons, there was mime sketches, there was the gallery and the painting, all the artwork that Tony Hart did. And it all blended in together. And then what was really exciting about it was the opportunity to develop some of the electronic tricks that television can do so well. I can't quite remember when I first started to use signs on the programme, but I think it may have been something to do with the mime group, because I had been learning it from the actors, and the producer, Ursula Eason, was also very interested in it. So we decided to give it a try, but the response was very, very divided, because teachers of the deaf were horrified. And I remember one letter we had said, "How dare you use this disgusting language?" They hated it. And yet we had letters from deaf people. I remember one letter from a matron in a hospital who wrote and said, "We had a deaf child in our ward and we couldn't get any kind of response. But when the child saw the programme and saw the signs, she suddenly came to life and she realised that this was a way to communicate with this child." So it was both sides of the coin, you know.
And that's the theme for today's programme, the seaside.
It had been hoped that the mime group, brought together for the programme for deaf children, would be able to work on Vision On. But the directors were unhappy about working with amateurs and complained that they were not members of Equity.
We went back to performing live in theatre situations, mostly in small clubs or educational places or community centres and so on. But it went on developing with a live audience. And about the same time, we heard about this new company that had suddenly appeared on the scene in America, the National Theatre of the Deaf in America, who were having such tremendous success. So I thought, well, I'd like to go and see what they're doing. They were using a form of language which they called sign mime, a combination of gesture and mime and American Sign Language, which opened up this whole world of text, translating a text. So when I came back to England, I thought, well, maybe we could branch out and reach a wider audience by using that form of theatre. We became the British Theatre of the Deaf soon after I came back from America, I think, once we started to branch out into a theatre company. And when we finally got the funding, it was about 1974, we knew we could do a fully professional tour, and that was arranged for the autumn of 1974.
Explain, O Master of the world.
I have considered this matter, and this is my irrevocable judgment. If both would live, let the Lady Pavane return to my harem, to be my wife in lawful wedlock, and be treated with all the honour her boldness and her beauty merit.
The deaf community were beginning to feel they should run their own affairs. It was happening everywhere. They called it deaf power, but that's a bit strong, I think, for what was happening, because it was inevitable. It was so understandable. And many of the members of the company had they'd studied for the drama board exams, they had done business management, they'd done publicity. You know, they were really getting to know the whole business quite well, and I just thought it's time to make a break. Working for television and meeting deaf people through the programme for deaf children, and then visiting schools for the deaf and meeting all the deaf actors and the development of the theatre of the deaf. It was so organic. It all just grew out of what one was doing somehow, and it made tremendous impact on me, of course, and it still influences what I do now. But it gave me this opportunity to explore the sort of theatre and the sort of television that I'm really interested in.
If you want to know more about Pat Keysell's one-woman show, then contact See Here. The address will be at the end of the programme. But now it's time for the news review.
Hello and welcome back. We start this week's news review with a look at one of the week's main stories: the election of the new Mayor of London. There are 4 main candidates for the job: Frank Dobson for Labour, Stephen Norris for the Conservatives, Susan Kramer for the Liberal Democrats, and the independent candidate, former leader of the GLC, Ken Livingstone. But why do we need to have an elected Mayor of London? And what responsibilities will the new Mayor have? The City of London did have its own form of self-government up until the 1980s, when then Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher abolished the Greater London Council. The powers and functions of the new Mayor of London have been laid out in what's been called the Greater London Act. The new Mayor will have their own advisors. They will have policy units and the power to form their own cabinet, and also to appoint assembly members to a range of authorities and boards across Greater London. The Assembly will have a budget of £3.3 billion and will have responsibility for police, fire, transport and economic development, although the Home Secretary will retain the power to overrule the Mayor on police spending. The issues and the policies on the agenda in the race to become the new Mayor have been overshadowed in recent weeks by the selection process to put forward the candidate for the Labour Party. The 2 main contenders were Frank Dobson and Ken Livingstone. Frank Dobson won the election and, despite repeatedly pledging to support the official Labour candidate, Ken Livingstone has chosen to stand as an independent. Earlier, I spoke to Paul Redfern from the British Deaf Association, who has been following the race, to find out more. First of all, I asked him, why does London need a new elected mayor, and what power will they have?
Well, first of all, there's going to be transport. There are huge complaints about tubes and trains and so on, and these need to be sorted out. Secondly, air quality and air pollution. Improvements need to be made. There were times last summer when people who suffer from asthma were warned to stay indoors. Another issue is business and the need for business development. There's housing. There needs to be more housing because there are more and more single people, so more housing needs to be built. Then there's the police. A lot of people don't have any confidence in the police, that they treat people unfairly and discriminate against certain groups of people, that they need to treat people equally. Those are the key issues.
There was some controversy over Labour's selection procedure. We asked Paul what went wrong.
Well, the Labour Party had to devise a voting system and have decided to use the same system as before, which is one of electoral colleges. What it means is that there are three types of voters. There are party members who vote, only those who live in London, MPs' votes, and the unions' votes. There's a different electoral system to that one, which is called one member, one vote. So there are two voting systems, and Labour has chosen the former. Some people like the system, some don't. But it's caused considerable controversy.
Should Ken Livingstone be elected, we wondered, would it be difficult for him to work with a Labour administration?
Well, really, I don't think it'll matter whether the Labour candidate is elected or any of the others. As mayor, they have to represent London, and sometimes London's needs will differ from those of the government. Frank Dobson himself has said that if he's elected, he will represent London and may, on occasion, have to challenge the government. So really, it doesn't matter which candidate is elected. Sometimes they'll have to challenge the government, and sometimes they'll work closely with it. The main thing is that they support and represent the people of London. So really, it doesn't matter.
What about the policies of particular interest to deaf Londoners?
Well, the deaf community need access to transport, they need to know about housing, they need to know about the police, and their use of interpreters, among other things. The deaf community don't have their own distinct issues, they just have an interest in the same issues as everyone else.
The BDA has been working on a project around this issue. We asked Paul to tell us more.
Well, the BDA have been working closely with two organisations. One is called Arts Inform and the other is the Institute for Citizenship. As a result, there will be a school's information pack, the aim of which is to inform school children about the mayoral contest and the issues involved, really in order to encourage those children to talk to their parents about voting. It's not to tell them who they should vote for, but to encourage them to register their vote.
Many thanks to Paul Redfern for keeping us up to date. Now, Londoners have their chance to vote on May the 4th, so if you live in London, don't forget to have your say. Now, the recent floods in Mozambique have left the African country in turmoil and facing an uncertain future as aid agencies struggle to determine where the aid effort is most needed. The floodwaters have begun to recede, but have left the country ravaged by disease, with thousands of people cut off from the aid agencies trying to offer help. It's been estimated that up to 250,000 people have been displaced by the floods, most of whom are now living in temporary camps. Many are still sleeping out in the open. The focus of the relief effort has switched recently to moving those people who have been displaced to areas of the country where there is clean water and medical care. The death toll is difficult to assess and is expected to soar as the floodwaters recede and reveal the bodies of those who have drowned. And cases of cholera and malaria are likely to increase. The UN Special Envoy Ross Mountain has said that many of the survivors were ignoring the advice of aid workers and returning to areas still under threat of floods as the rain continues to fall. It will be some time before the extent of the damage to the country's population is known, as the staple food crops are rotting in the fields, and many of the nation's livestock are already dead or dying. Now, are you someone who is a regular surfer on the internet? Well, if you are, then you're still in the minority in this country. In the United States, 50% of households are connected to the World Wide Web. Part of the reason that we lag behind comes down to the cost of being online. One report suggests that it would cost £237 per year if you were to be online for 5 hours a day, but only £26 per year in America. Changes are on the way, however, with the announcement by internet service provider Alta Vista that they will be offering unlimited internet access for a yearly fee, expected to be between £10 and £20. So, good news for the consumer. That's all from the news review for this week. We'll be back again next week, but now, back to Lara.
Thank you. Well, that's it for today, but let me tell you about next week's programme. Memnos Costi will be reporting on university life and the difficulties some deaf students have because of the lack of communication support. We meet the winner of the RAD story competition and find out what inspired her work. And we have news about free access for deaf people to cinemas. So don't miss it. See you later. Bye-bye.
Art Zone on BBC Two. Review courting strong opinions and lively discussion.
We only really know what is new.
Ralph Fiennes stars in How Proust Can Change Your Life.